When a billionaire's blind son meets an autistic girl in Central Park, something impossible happens that changes everything. What secret connects these two children? Hit that like button and tell me in the comments if you believe in miracles. The autumn wind whispered through Central Park as 9-year-old Michael Harrison sat motionless on his private bench, designer sunglasses hiding eyes that had never seen the world's beauty. His personal nurse, Mrs. Chen, watched him with practiced concern, while his father's security team maintained their invisible perimeter around the boy who had everything money could buy, except sight. "Master Michael, would you like to move closer to the playground?" Mrs. Chen asked gently, her voice carrying the same careful tone everyone used around him. The soft rustling of leaves overhead provided the only soundtrack to his isolated world. Michael shook his head slowly, fingers tracing the smooth metal armrest of his bench. "They always stare," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant laughter of children. "I can feel their eyes on me, wondering what's wrong with the rich blind boy." 3 months earlier, the Harrison family's world had shifted when Michael's latest surgery, his 7th attempt to restore vision, had failed spectacularly. Dr. Morrison's words still echoed in his father's mind. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison. We've exhausted all conventional options. Medical science has no answers for Michael's condition." The bench where Michael sat had been custom installed by his father, Richard Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries and one of America's wealthiest men. Richard believed that if he couldn't give his son sight, he could at least provide comfort and security, but comfort couldn't fill the growing void in Michael's heart. "The children here sound so happy," Michael murmured, tilting his head toward the playground's melody of joy. "Tell me about them, Mrs. Chen. What do they look like when they laugh?" Mrs. Chen's throat tightened. In her 20 years of nursing, she'd never encountered a child who asked such heartbreaking questions with such quiet dignity. "They look like sunshine, Master Michael. Their faces light up like the morning sun breaking through clouds." Unknown to them, 50 yards away, 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez struggled with her own invisible prison. The small girl, with dark curls and intense brown eyes, sat cross-legged beneath an oak tree, methodically arranging fallen leaves in precise patterns, while her exhausted mother Maria watched from a nearby bench. "Emma, sweetheart, other children are playing on the swings," Maria called softly. "Don't you want to join them?" Emma didn't respond, her fingers continuing their ritualistic dance with the autumn leaves. Red, yellow, orange. Each leaf found its designated place in her complex pattern. The world moved too fast for Emma, spoke too loudly, demanded too much. Only in these quiet moments could she find peace. Earlier that morning, Emma had been expelled from her 3rd school in 2 years. The teacher's words still burned in Maria's memory. "We're not equipped to handle her special needs. Perhaps a specialized facility would be better." Another rejection, another closed door for her extraordinary daughter. As Maria wiped tears, she thought Emma couldn't see. She didn't notice her daughter's head suddenly lifting, turning towards something only she could perceive. Emma's unusual gift, what doctors called her enhanced sensory processing, had detected something different in the park today. Standing slowly, Emma abandoned her leaf pattern and began walking with purpose toward the area where Michael sat. Her bare feet made no sound on the grass as she moved with the fluid grace that always surprised adults, who expected autistic children to be clumsy. "Emma!" Maria called, alarmed by her daughter's sudden movement. "Where are you going, baby?" But Emma was already beyond hearing, drawn by an invisible force toward the boy in sunglasses who sat so perfectly still. Something about his stillness called to her own need for quiet in a chaotic world. Mrs. Chen noticed the approaching child first. "Master Michael, there's a little girl coming this way. She's about 7, with beautiful dark hair, and she's walking very deliberately." Michael's head turned slightly. Can you tell her to go away? I don't want to scare her." But Emma was already too close to turn back. She stopped directly in front of Michael's bench, studying his face with the intense focus she usually reserved for her leaf patterns. Something about him seemed familiar, though she was certain they'd never met. "You can't see," Emma said simply, her voice carrying the directness that often made adults uncomfortable. Michael's shoulders tensed. "No, I can't. Does that bother you?" Emma tilted her head, considering the question with the seriousness she applied to all things. "Your eyes are sad. Not because they can't see, because of something else." The observation hit Michael like a physical blow. No one, not doctors, not therapists, not even his father, had ever identified the deeper pain that lived behind his blindness. How could this strange little girl see what no one else could? "Emma!" Maria's voice carried across the space as she hurried toward them. "I'm so sorry," she called to Mrs. Chen. "She doesn't usually approach strangers." But Emma paid no attention to her mother's approach. Instead, she reached out with one small finger and gently touched Michael's hand where it rested on the bench. The contact was electric, not painful, but startling in its intensity. Michael gasped, pulling his hand back. "What did you just do?" Emma's eyes widened with something approaching wonder. "You feel different, like you're waiting for something." "I'm waiting to see," Michael whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "I've been waiting my whole life to see." Maybe," Emma said with the matter-of-fact tone that made her pronouncements sound like universal truths. "You're waiting for the wrong thing." Before anyone could ask what she meant, Emma turned and walked back toward her mother, leaving Michael sitting in stunned silence. The brief encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes, but something fundamental had shifted in the air around them. As Maria approached to collect her daughter, she offered an apologetic smile to Mrs. Chen. "I hope she didn't disturb you. Emma is special. She sometimes says things that don't make sense to the rest of us." "On the contrary, Mrs. Chen replied, watching Michael's face with growing curiosity. "I think she might have made perfect sense." The encounter with Emma haunted Michael for the rest of the day. As his private car glided through Manhattan traffic toward the Harrison family's Fifth Avenue penthouse, he found himself replaying every word the strange little girl had spoken. "Mrs. Chen," he said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "What did she look like? The girl, I mean, really look like?" Mrs. Chen considered her words carefully. In her years with the Harrison family, she'd learned that Michael's questions about the visual world required delicate answers. "She had the most remarkable eyes, Master Michael. Dark brown, but not ordinary brown. They seemed to see everything. Not just what was in front of her, but deeper things, things most people miss." Michael nodded slowly. "She touched my hand and it felt warm, not just physically warm, but something else, like she was seeing inside me." "Perhaps she was," Mrs. Chen murmured, though she wasn't entirely sure what she meant by it. The Harrison penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building that Richard had purchased entirely for privacy. As they entered the private elevator, Michael felt the familiar weight of his gilded cage settling around him. Marble floors, priceless artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views he'd never see. All of it meaningless to a boy who lived in eternal darkness. Richard Harrison stood in his study, phone pressed to his ear when they arrived. Even from across the room, Michael could hear the tension in his father's voice as he discussed quarterly projections and merger details. At 52, Richard had built an empire, but couldn't build his son a future that didn't revolve around limitations. "How was the park today?" Richard asked after ending his call, his voice carrying the forced cheerfulness that always appeared when he discussed Michael's outings. "Different," Michael replied honestly. "I met someone." Richard's eyebrows rose. In the 3 years since Michael's accident, the riding accident that had stolen his sight and changed their family forever, his son rarely showed interest in social interaction. The boy had retreated into a world of audiobooks, classical music, and carefully structured solitude. "Tell me about this, someone," Richard said, settling into the leather chair across from his son. Michael hesitated. How could he explain the electric feeling of Emma's touch, or the way her simple observations had cut straight to the heart of his deepest fears? "Her name is Emma, she's 7, and she said things that made sense in a way nothing has for a long time." "What kind of things?" "She said I was waiting for the wrong thing." Michael's fingers drummed against his chair's armrest. "What if she's right, Dad? What if I've been so focused on getting my sight back that I've missed something else entirely?" Richard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October evening. His son's entire medical treatment plan revolved around the hope of restored vision. The best doctors in the world, experimental procedures, cutting-edge technology, everything aimed at that single goal. "Michael, you can't give up hope." "Doctor," Morrison said there might be new treatments. "I'm not giving up hope," Michael interrupted with unusual firmness. "I'm just wondering if hope has been looking in the wrong direction." Across the city, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, Emma Rodriguez sat at her small desk, carefully arranging colored pencils while her mother prepared their simple dinner. The apartment's walls were covered with Emma's drawings, intricate patterns and shapes that seemed random to most observers but held deep meaning for their creator. "Emma, dinner's ready," Maria called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the exhaustion that had become her constant companion since her husband's death 2 years earlier. Emma didn't respond immediately. Her attention focused on a new drawing she'd started after returning from the park. Unlike her usual geometric patterns, this drawing featured 2 figures, a boy sitting on a bench and a girl standing beside him. But the most unusual element was the light emanating from the space between their hands, rendered in brilliant yellow and gold. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Maria asked, approaching with a plate of rice and beans. "The boy from the park," Emma replied without looking up. "He has light inside him, but it's trapped." Maria studied the drawing with growing concern. Emma's artwork often reflected her inner emotional state, but this piece was different, more complex, more purposeful. "What kind of light?" "The kind that helps people see things that aren't there," Emma said matter-of-factly, adding another layer of gold to the space between the figures. "He thinks he needs his eyes to work, but that's not the right kind of seeing." "Emma, honey, the boy is blind. He needs his eyes to see." Emma finally looked up from her drawing, fixing her mother with the intense stare that always made Maria feel like her daughter was looking directly into her soul. "There are different kinds of seeing, Mama. Some people see with their eyes but miss everything important. Some people see with their hearts and never miss anything." Done. The observation was so profound that Maria had to sit down. At 7 years old, Emma often demonstrated an understanding of the world that seemed far beyond her years. Teachers called it part of her autism spectrum condition, but Maria suspected something deeper was at work in her daughter's unique mind. "Did you like meeting the boy?" Maria asked gently. "Michael," Emma corrected, though Maria was certain no one had mentioned the boy's name during their brief encounter. "Yes, I liked meeting him. He's been waiting a long time for something, and today he started waiting for the right thing." "How do you know his name is Michael?" Emma returned to her drawing, adding delicate silver lines around the boy figure. "Sometimes people tell you things without using words. Michael's name was in his sadness." That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her narrow bed, Maria sat at the kitchen table staring at her daughter's latest artwork. The drawing seemed to glow in the lamplight, and she found herself wondering if Emma had somehow captured something real in those golden streaks between the 2 children. Meanwhile, in his luxurious bedroom 40 miles away, Michael lay awake, listening to the city's distant hum. For the first time in months, his dreams weren't filled with memories of the light he'd lost, but with curiosity about the light Emma seemed to believe he already possessed. Neither child could sleep deeply that night, both sensing that their brief encounter had set something larger into motion, something that would test everything they thought they knew about sight, connection, and the invisible forces that bind certain souls together across the vast darkness of an uncaring world. The next morning arrived grey and drizzling, matching Richard Harrison's mood as he reviewed the latest medical reports in his study. Dr. Morrison's files sprawled across his mahogany desk, 3 years of failed procedures, declining hope, and mounting evidence that his son's blindness might be permanent. "Sir?" His assistant, James, knocked softly on the door. "The car is ready for Master Michael's therapy appointment." Richard nodded without looking up from the devastating medical terminology that had become his daily reading. Optic nerve damage, retinal scarring, cortical blindness, words that meant his son would never see a sunset, never read a book with his own eyes, never look upon his father's face with recognition. Michael sat in the back seat of the Bentley, his fingers trailing along the window's cool surface, as Mrs. Chen navigated Manhattan traffic toward Dr. Sarah Kim's office. His weekly therapy sessions had become routine, an hour of discussing adaptation strategies and emotional coping mechanisms, while carefully avoiding the topic everyone wanted to address: his growing resignation. "Master Michael," Mrs. Chen said gently, "you seem different today. More alert." Michael smiled slightly. "I keep thinking about what that girl said, about waiting for the wrong thing. Do you think it's possible to want something so badly that you miss what you actually need?" Before Mrs. Chen could respond, Michael suddenly straightened in his seat. "Stop the car." "Sir, please, just stop the car for a moment." The driver pulled to the curb, and Michael rolled down his window. The sounds of the city washed over him, car horns, footsteps, conversation fragments, but underneath it all, he heard something that made his heart race, a familiar voice singing softly. 3 blocks away, Emma Rodriguez walked hand in hand with her mother toward the unemployment office, her clear voice carrying an improvised melody that seemed to weave through the urban chaos like a golden thread. She'd been humming the same tune since waking up, though she couldn't explain where it had come from. "Emma, we need to hurry," Maria said, checking her watch anxiously. The appointment at the unemployment office was crucial. Her job search had stretched into its 4th month, and their savings were nearly exhausted. But Emma stopped walking abruptly, her head tilted as if listening to something beyond normal hearing. "He's close," she said simply. "Who's close, sweetheart?" "Michael, the boy with trapped light. He's listening for me." Maria felt the familiar combination of pride and worry that Emma's pronouncements always triggered. Her daughter's intuitive abilities were remarkable, but they often led to complications in a world that didn't understand exceptional children. In the Bentley, Michael's breathing had quickened. "Mrs. Chen, I can hear her. The girl from yesterday, she's singing, and it's like her voice is cutting through everything else." Mrs. Chen exchanged a concerned glance with the driver. Master Michael had never demonstrated such acute hearing abilities before. "Are you certain it's the same child?" "I'm sure." Michael's hand pressed against the window. "Please, can we find her? I need to ask her something." Against her better judgment, Mrs. Chen instructed the driver to follow the sound. 2 blocks later, they spotted Emma and Maria walking along the sidewalk, the little girl's voice still carrying that haunting melody. "There," Michael said with absolute certainty, though he couldn't see them. "She's there." The Bentley pulled alongside the sidewalk, and Mrs. Chen lowered the window. "Excuse me," she called to Maria. "My young charge met your daughter yesterday in Central Park. He was wondering if he might speak with her again." Maria's protective instincts flared immediately. A luxury car, an expensive-looking Asian woman, and a request to speak with her autistic daughter. Every maternal alarm bell rang simultaneously. "I'm sorry, but we're late for an important appointment." But Emma had already turned toward the car, her face lighting up with recognition. "Michael," she said simply, approaching the vehicle with the same fearless directness she'd shown the day before. "Emma, no," Maria said sharply, but her daughter was already at the car window. "You came looking for me," Emma observed, studying Michael's face through the glass. "That means you're starting to see." "I can't see anything," Michael replied honestly. "But I could hear you singing from 3 blocks away. How is that possible?" Emma considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "Maybe your ears are learning to work like eyes. Some people see colors, some people hear them." The statement hung in the air between them like a revelation. Mrs. Chen found herself leaning forward, captivated by the strange conversation unfolding. "What color is my voice?" Michael asked, fully engaged despite the oddness of the question. "Silver and blue," Emma replied without hesitation, "like water under moonlight. But there are other colors trying to come through. Gold ones, bright ones. They're stuck behind the sad colors." Maria watched this exchange with growing amazement. Emma rarely engaged so naturally with strangers, and never with such philosophical depth. "Emma, we really need to go." "Wait," Michael said urgently. "Yesterday you said I was waiting for the wrong thing. What did you mean?" Emma stepped closer to the car, her small hand reaching toward the window. "You're waiting to see the world the way other people see it, but what if you could see it better? What if you could see the things that matter most, the things that are invisible to regular eyes?" "That's impossible." "Is it?" Emma's voice carried a gentle challenge. "You heard me singing from 3 blocks away. You felt something when I touched your hand yesterday. Maybe you're already seeing, just not with your eyes." Before anyone could respond, Emma suddenly grabbed her mother's hand and pulled her away from the car. "We have to go now, Mama. The important thing is happening soon." "What important thing?" Maria asked, but Emma was already walking away, her attention turned inward, as if processing complex information. Michael pressed his face to the window, listening to their footsteps fade into the city's background noise. "Mrs. Chen, what just happened?" "I'm not entirely sure, Master Michael," she replied truthfully. "But I think that little girl just suggested that losing your sight might not be the limitation we've all assumed it was." D. The therapy session with Dr. Kim proved to be unlike any other. Instead of discussing adaptation strategies, Michael found himself describing his encounters with Emma and the strange new awareness that seemed to be awakening within him. "These heightened sensory experiences you're describing, Doctor," Kim said carefully, "they're not uncommon in cases of significant vision loss. The brain often compensates by enhancing other senses." "But this feels different," Michael insisted. "It's not just better hearing. It's like I'm perceiving things that weren't there before. Things that might have always been there, but I was too busy trying to see with my eyes to notice them." Dr. Kim set down her pen, studying the 9-year-old who seemed to be articulating concepts that challenged conventional understanding of sensory perception. "Michael, what if we tried an experiment? What if, instead of focusing on restoring your vision, we explored expanding these new abilities you're developing?" "You mean stop trying to get my sight back?" "I mean stop limiting yourself to one definition of sight." That evening, Emma sat in her bedroom surrounded by art supplies, working on a new drawing that depicted the same 2 figures from the night before, but this version was different. The light between them was no longer trapped, and both children seemed to be glowing with an inner radiance that transformed the entire scene. "Emma," Maria called from the living room, "can you come here for a minute?" Emma found her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a newspaper spread before her. "Look at this," Maria said, pointing to a small article buried on page 6. The headline read, Harrison Industries CEO seeks alternative treatments for son's rare blindness. D. The brief article mentioned Richard Harrison's substantial donations to research into unconventional approaches to visual impairment, including studies on enhanced sensory development and what researchers cautiously termed compensatory perception abilities. That's Michael's father, Emma said with certainty, though the article never mentioned the boy's name. How do you know that? Emma studied the small photograph of Richard Harrison that accompanied the article. He has the same sadness as Michael, but his is angry sadness. Michael's is waiting sadness. Maria felt a chill of recognition. Everything Emma had said about the boy was proving eerily accurate. Sweetheart, how do you know these things? Emma returned to her drawing, adding final touches to the golden light that seemed to bridge the space between the two children. Some people are connected before they meet, Mama. Some people are supposed to help each other learn how to see. As she spoke, Emma's pencil moved across the paper with unusual precision, creating details that seemed to emerge without conscious planning. When she finished, the drawing showed not just two children, but two families whose lives were about to intersect in ways none of them could yet imagine. In his penthouse bedroom, Michael lay awake listening to the city's nighttime symphony with newfound attention. Every sound carried information. The rhythm of footsteps revealed emotions, the tone of distant conversations suggested relationships, the pattern of traffic lights created a musical structure he'd never noticed before. For the first time since his accident, Michael felt something approaching excitement about his future. Emma had suggested that his blindness might not be a limitation, but a doorway to a different kind of sight. Tomorrow he would begin testing that theory, starting with a return to Central Park and a hope that the strange little girl would be there to guide him further into this mysterious new world of seeing without eyes. 2 weeks after their second encounter, Michael's world had transformed in ways that defied medical explanation. Dr. Kim documented his progress with a mixture of professional fascination and personal amazement, as his sensory abilities evolved beyond anything she'd witnessed in 20 years of practice. Describe what you're experiencing right now, Dr. Kim requested during their Thursday session, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of a scientist observing an unprecedented phenomenon. Michael sat perfectly still in the leather chair, his head tilted slightly as if listening to sounds beyond normal human perception. The afternoon sunlight streamed through Dr. Kim's office windows, but Michael's attention was focused on something far more subtle than environmental changes. There's a woman walking past your office door. She's wearing heels, leather, expensive ones, but her left ankle is weak from an old injury. She favors it when she thinks no one's watching. Michael paused, his brow furrowing in concentration. She's carrying emotional weight too, guilt about something that happened last winter, a decision she made that hurt someone she cares about. Dr. Kim glanced toward her office door, knowing that Michael couldn't possibly see the woman he described. Yet everything he said proved accurate when she later confirmed the details with her colleague, Dr. Martinez, who indeed struggled with a chronic ankle injury from a skiing accident years earlier, and who had been dealing with family issues stemming from a difficult decision she'd made the previous December. Michael, these abilities you're developing, they're extraordinary, but I need you to understand that not everyone will believe what you're experiencing. I know, Michael replied softly, his fingers tracing patterns on the chair's armrest. My father thinks it's compensation for my blindness. Mrs. Chen thinks it's a gift. But Emma says it's just me learning to see what was always there. The mention of Emma made Dr. Kim pause in her note-taking. The mysterious 7-year-old had become a constant presence in Michael's sessions, though she'd never met the child personally. Everything about this Emma Rodriguez seemed to defy conventional understanding of child development and social interaction patterns. "Have you seen Emma again?" "Every day," Michael admitted, his voice carrying a warmth that Dr. Kim had never heard before the girl entered his life. "We meet in Central Park. She's teaching me things that don't have names yet." What Michael didn't tell Dr. Kim was the true extent of his daily meetings with Emma. Each afternoon, while his father believed he was receiving extended therapy sessions, Michael and Mrs. Chen made their way to Central Park, where Emma waited beneath the same oak tree where they'd first encountered her. Maria Rodriguez had initially resisted these meetings, her protective maternal instincts warring with her recognition that something extraordinary was happening between the children. But Emma's behavior during their first week of encounters had convinced her that her daughter had found in Michael a companion who understood her unique way of perceiving the world. "Today, we practice seeing feelings," Emma announced as Michael settled beside her under the oak tree. The autumn air carried the scent of dying leaves and approaching winter, but both children seemed oblivious to the cold that made other park visitors hurry past bundled in heavy coats. The oak tree had become their unofficial headquarters, its massive trunk providing a sense of shelter and privacy that allowed them to explore Michael's developing abilities without the curious stares of passers-by. Emma had chosen this particular tree, she explained, because it was old enough to hold memories and wisdom that could help guide their work. "How do you see feelings?" Michael asked, though he'd learned over the past 2 weeks to accept Emma's unusual suggestions without skepticism. Each exercise she proposed had led to breakthroughs that astounded him. "Close your eyes. Well, you know what I mean," Emma said with the practical directness that characterized all her communications. "Listen to the people walking by. Don't listen to their words or their footsteps. Listen to the space around them." Michael focused his attention on the park's ambient sounds, filtering out the obvious noise to concentrate on something more subtle. The technique required a kind of mental adjustment that was becoming more natural with each practice session. Gradually, he began to perceive what Emma meant, an almost tangible quality that surrounded each person, like emotional weather patterns that existed just beyond normal awareness. "The man on the jogger's path," Michael said slowly, his voice filled with wonder at his own perceptions. "He's carrying something heavy, not physically heavy. Something that makes the air around him feel dense." "Grief," Emma confirmed matter-of-factly, her own awareness tracking the same individual Michael had identified. "His wife died last month. He runs here because this is where they had their first date 40 years ago." "How do you know that?" "People leave pieces of their stories in the places that matter to them. If you know how to listen, the stories tell themselves." Emma picked up a fallen leaf, examining its intricate vein patterns with the same intensity she applied to reading human emotions. "Some places hold more stories than others. This park has thousands of love stories, sad stories, hope stories, all layered together like invisible photographs." Over the following hour, Emma guided Michael through increasingly complex exercises in what she called feeling sight. He learned to distinguish between different types of sadness, the sharp grief of fresh loss versus the dull ache of old wounds, the regret that came from action versus the sorrow that stemmed from inaction. He began to recognize the subtle energy signatures of hope and despair, and to perceive the invisible connections that linked certain people across the crowded park. "There," Emma said suddenly, pointing toward a bench 50 yards away, where a solitary figure sat in perfect stillness. "Do you feel her?" Michael concentrated, extending his newfound awareness toward the area Emma indicated. The exercise required him to project his consciousness beyond his physical location, a skill that still felt miraculous despite weeks of practice. "A woman, she's waiting for someone who isn't coming." Her son, Emma whispered, her voice carrying the particular gentleness she reserved for discussing profound pain. He died in Afghanistan 2 years ago. She comes here every Thursday because Thursday was his favorite day, but today is different. How is it different? Today she's going to stop waiting. Today she's going to start living again, and you're going to help her. Before Michael could ask what she meant, Emma stood and began walking toward the woman on the bench. Michael followed, his heart racing with uncertainty about what Emma expected him to do. This would be their first direct intervention with a stranger, and the responsibility felt enormous. The woman was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes that held the particular emptiness of someone who had lost everything that mattered. She sat rigidly upright, staring at nothing with the practiced composure of long-standing grief. Her clothing was neat, but showed the subtle signs of someone who had stopped caring about appearances, colors that didn't quite match, a sweater with a small hole she hadn't bothered to repair. "Excuse me," Emma said politely, approaching the bench with her characteristic fearless directness. "My friend has something to tell you." The woman looked up, startled by the interruption. Her gaze moved from Emma to Michael, taking in his sunglasses and the white cane Mrs. Chen had recently insisted he carry for public appearances. "I'm sorry, but I'm not really in the mood for—" "Your son wants you to be happy," Michael said quietly, the words emerging from someplace deeper than conscious thought. "He's worried about you. He says Thursday was his favorite day because that's when you used to bake chocolate chip cookies together, and he wants you to remember the cookies, not the waiting." The woman's face went white, her composure cracking as she stared at the 9-year-old boy who had somehow accessed memories that no living person could know. "How could you possibly know that? Who told you about the cookies?" Michael felt Emma's hand slip into his, her touch somehow amplifying his ability to perceive the invisible connections that linked all living things. Through their joined awareness, he could see the threads of love that still connected the woman to her deceased son, golden strands that grief had obscured but not severed. "I can see things that aren't there," Michael explained gently. "And right now, I can see that he's not really gone. He's just different. And he's asking you to be different too. He wants you to remember that love doesn't end when life ends. It just changes form." Tears began streaming down the woman's face as she stared at the remarkable children who had somehow accessed memories that no living person could know. "He loved Thursdays. We always baked together on Thursdays from the time he was 3 years old until he enlisted at 18, but after he died I couldn't. I haven't baked anything in 2 years. Maybe," Emma suggested gently, "you could bake something today. Not because you're sad, but because baking makes Thursday feel the way it's supposed to feel. Your son isn't gone. He's just waiting in a different place, and he'd rather wait somewhere that smells like chocolate chip cookies." The woman reached out hesitantly, then touched Michael's hand. The contact created a bridge of understanding that allowed her to feel, for just a moment, the continued presence of the love she thought she'd lost forever. "Who are you, children?" "We're learning how to see," Michael replied simply. "And maybe we're supposed to help other people learn too." As they walked away from the transformed woman, Michael felt something shifting inside his understanding of his own purpose. The encounter had shown him that his abilities weren't just personal gifts. They were tools for healing that could help other people navigate their own darkness. "Emma, what just happened there?" "You helped someone see that love doesn't die when people die. It just changes shape." Emma's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone she used for her most profound observations. "That's what you're really learning to see. All the love that's still there, just in forms that regular eyes can't recognize." That evening, Richard Harrison sat in his study reviewing the daily reports Mrs. Chen provided about Michael's progress. Her notes had become increasingly puzzling over the past 2 weeks, documenting abilities that seemed to challenge everything Richard understood about his son's condition. The reports read like science fiction rather than medical documentation. "Mrs. Chen," he called when she knocked on his door, "I need to discuss Michael's unusual development." "Yes, sir?" Mrs. Chen entered the study with the careful bearing of someone who had been preparing for this conversation. "These reports about enhanced perception, about his ability to read people's emotions from across a room. Are you certain you're not exaggerating?" Mrs. Chen had anticipated this conversation and had spent considerable time considering how to explain phenomena that defied conventional understanding. "Mr. Harrison, I've been caring for children for 25 years. What I'm witnessing with Master Michael isn't exaggeration. It's unprecedented." Richard leaned back in his chair, struggling to reconcile hope with skepticism. The businessman in him demanded evidence and logic, but the father in him wanted to believe that something miraculous was happening to his son. "The doctors say that enhanced sensory compensation is normal in cases of vision loss, but what you're describing sounds like..." "Like what, sir?" "Like something that belongs in fairy tales, not medical journals." Mrs. Chen chose her words carefully, understanding that Richard's acceptance would be crucial for Michael's continued development. "Perhaps, Mr. Harrison, there are some realities that medical journals aren't equipped to document yet. And perhaps your son is showing us that the boundaries between possible and impossible aren't as fixed as we've always believed." The breakthrough came on a grey November morning when Emma arrived at Central Park, carrying a small canvas bag that seemed to pulse with mysterious significance. Michael sensed her excitement before she spoke, her emotional energy crackling like electricity in the cold air that promised the season's first snow. "Today is the important day," Emma announced, settling beside him under their oak tree with unusual solemnity. "Today you learn to see the thing that's been waiting for you your whole life." "What thing?" Michael asked, though he'd learned over the past month to trust Emma's cryptic pronouncements completely. Each prediction she made had proven accurate in ways that continued to astound him. "The reason you lost your sight in the first place. The reason we found each other. The reason everything had to happen exactly the way it did." Emma's voice carried the weight of inherited wisdom that seemed far beyond her 7 years. Emma opened her canvas bag with ceremonial care and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft cloth that felt ancient and precious. As she unwrapped it, Michael felt an inexplicable familiarity wash over him, not recognition exactly, but a sense that whatever she held connected to something deep in his personal history. "This belonged to someone who loved you very much," Emma said softly, placing the object in Michael's hands with the reverence of someone passing along a sacred relic. Michael's fingers explored the item carefully, his enhanced tactile sensitivity providing detailed information about its construction and history. It was a small wooden horse, carved with intricate detail and worn smooth by countless touches. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every line of the mane, every curve of the body had been shaped with loving precision. The moment his skin made contact with the wood, images flooded his mind. Not visual memories exactly, but emotional impressions so vivid they felt like sight itself. A woman's laugh, warm and musical, filled with joy at a small boy's delight. Gentle hands guiding his small fingers as they traced the horse's carved mane, teaching him to appreciate beauty through touch. A voice singing lullabies in Spanish, filled with love and longing that transcended language barriers. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon that meant safety and home and unconditional acceptance. "Isabella," Michael whispered, the name emerging from buried memories that predated his accident by many years. This belonged to Isabella. Emma nodded solemnly, her dark eyes reflecting understanding that seemed ancient. "Your nanny, before Mrs. Chen. She took care of you when you were very small, before the horse-riding accident that hurt your eyes. But how could you possibly have this?" Michael's voice broke slightly as waves of suppressed grief washed over him. Isabella's departure from his life had been one of his earliest experiences with loss, though he'd never fully understood why she'd left so suddenly. "Because Isabella was my grandmother," Emma said simply, her words hitting Michael like a physical blow that reordered his entire understanding of their connection. "She died last year, but before she died, she told me about a little boy she loved like her own son. A boy who lost his sight but was destined to find a different kind of vision. She made me promise to find you and give you this when you were ready." Michael's hands trembled as he held the carved horse, understanding flooding through him like light breaking through darkness. The wooden toy felt warm against his palms, as if it retained some essence of Isabella's love after all these years. "Isabella used to tell me stories about a magic horse that could see into people's hearts. She said someday I'd learn to see the way the horse saw. She knew what was going to happen to you," Emma continued, her voice carrying the weight of inherited wisdom that had been passed down through generations. "Not the accident. She couldn't have prevented that. But she knew that losing your sight was part of something bigger. She knew you were meant to develop abilities that go beyond ordinary vision. This is impossible. People can't predict the future. Some people can see patterns that others miss. Grandmother Isabella was one of those people. She saw that you and I were connected before either of us was born. She saw that your blindness and my autism aren't disabilities. They're gifts that make us able to perceive things that normal people can't." Michael felt the truth of Emma's words resonating in his bones, confirmed by every extraordinary experience he'd had since meeting her. The enhanced hearing, the ability to read emotions, the strange intuitive knowledge that had been developing. None of it was compensation for his lost sight. It was the awakening of abilities that had always been dormant within him, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. Why didn't she tell me this herself before she died? Because you weren't ready. You had to lose hope in getting your regular sight back before you could open yourself to a different kind of seeing. And I had to grow old enough to understand what she needed me to do. Emma reached into her bag again and withdrew a folded letter, yellowed with age and sealed with wax. "She wrote this for you. She wanted you to have it when you understood who you really are." Michael's hands shook as he held the letter, sensing the love and intention that had gone into its creation. The paper felt precious, imbued with emotions that transcended the physical materials from which it was made. "Will you read it to me?" Emma broke the wax seal with careful reverence and unfolded the paper, her young voice carrying the cadence of someone much older as she read Isabella's final message. "My dearest Michael, if you are hearing these words, it means you have found Emma and begun to understand the gift that lives inside your beautiful soul. I knew from the moment I first held you as a baby that you were special, not because of what you could see with your eyes, but because of what you could see with your heart. The accident that took your sight was not a tragedy, my precious boy. It was the key that unlocked abilities that few people in this world possess. You were born to see the invisible connections between souls, to perceive the love that flows between people like light, to understand the secret language that hearts speak to each other across the darkness. Our family has carried this gift for generations, passing it down through the women who serve as guardians and guides. Emma is your guide in this new world of seeing. She carries the same gifts, inherited through our bloodline and awakened by her own unique neurology. Together, you will learn to use your abilities to help others, to heal hearts that are broken, and to show people that love never truly dies, it only changes form. Remember, mi niño querido, that some people are born to see with their eyes, and others are born to see with their souls. You are one of the soul seers, and that makes you more precious than all the treasure in the world. Use your gift wisely, use it with love, and never forget that you are exactly who you were meant to be. At it, as Emma's voice faded into silence, Michael felt 15 years of confusion and grief transforming into something approaching joy. The wooden horse in his hand seemed to pulse with warmth, connecting him not just to Isabella's memory, but to a lineage of people who had possessed similar gifts throughout history. "There's something else," Emma said quietly, her voice taking on the serious tone she used for her most important revelations. "Something Grandmother Isabella wanted you to know about your father." "What about him?" "The reason he's been so desperate to restore your sight isn't just because he loves you. It's because he blames himself for your accident, and he thinks fixing your eyes will fix his guilt. But his guilt is keeping him from seeing who you really are now." Michael felt a stab of understanding pierce through him, illuminating patterns in his father's behavior that had puzzled him for years. "He was the one who insisted I learn to ride, even though I was afraid of horses. But the accident had to happen, Michael. Without it, you never would have discovered who you really are. And your father needs to learn that too, or his guilt will destroy the love between you." "How can I help him understand?" "By showing him that what he thinks he broke was actually what needed to break for something better to emerge. By proving to him that his son isn't damaged. His son is extraordinary." That evening, Michael made a decision that would change the course of his family's future. Instead of hiding his developing abilities from his father, he would demonstrate them. Instead of pretending to be the tragic figure Richard expected, he would reveal the remarkable person he was becoming. "Dad," Michael said as they sat together in the penthouse's living room, the city lights creating patterns of warmth and shadow that he could perceive through means that had nothing to do with sight. "I need to tell you something about what's been happening to me." Richard looked up from his laptop, noting the unusual confidence in his son's voice and the strange radiance that seemed to emanate from the boy's entire being. "What is it, Michael?" "I'm not the person you think I am anymore, and I need you to see who I really am. Son, I don't understand. Mrs. I don't. Patterson from the 14th floor is going to call you tomorrow morning," Michael interrupted calmly, his voice carrying the absolute certainty that had become characteristic of his predictions. "Her husband is having an affair, and she's going to ask if you know any good divorce lawyers. Tell her that the marriage can still be saved, but only if she's willing to forgive him for something that happened 20 years ago, something she's never told him she knows about." Richard stared at his son in shock, the laptop sliding from his knees as he struggled to process what he'd just heard. "How could you possibly know any of that?" "Because I can see things now, Dad. Not with my eyes, but with something better. I can see the connections between people, the love that flows between them, the pain they carry, the secrets they hide. And I can see that you've been carrying guilt about my accident that's eating you alive from the inside. Michael, it wasn't your fault. And even if it was, it doesn't matter anymore, because losing my sight was the best thing that ever happened to me. It helped me become who I was always meant to be." As Michael spoke, Richard saw something in his son's face that he'd never noticed before, a radiance that had nothing to do with physical sight and everything to do with inner illumination. For the first time since the accident, Richard glimpsed the possibility that his son's future might be brighter than anything he dared to imagine. Christmas morning arrived, with fresh snow blanketing Central Park in pristine white, creating a world that Michael experienced through the symphony of muffled sounds and the crisp scent of winter air. 3 months had passed since Emma had given him Isabella's letter, and in that time his abilities had evolved beyond anything either child could have imagined. The Harrison penthouse had been transformed for the holidays. though Michael appreciated the decorations through senses that provided richer information than mere sight ever could. The Fraser fir Christmas tree emanated the deep, green scent of mountain forests, while the twinkling lights created a subtle warmth pattern he could detect from across the room. Garlands of pine and holly released their festive fragrances into the air, creating an olfactory tapestry that painted the space more vividly than any visual display. "Master Michael," Mrs. Chen announced, her voice carrying an unusual excitement as she entered the living room, where he sat enjoying the sensory richness of the morning. "Your father has a special surprise for you this morning." Richard Harrison stood by the tree, his emotional state radiating nervous excitement that Michael perceived as clearly as if his father had announced his feelings aloud. In the 3 months since Michael had revealed his extraordinary abilities, their relationship had undergone a profound transformation. Richard had moved from skepticism to wonder to acceptance, finally understanding that his son didn't need to be fixed. He needed to be celebrated. "Michael," Richard said, his voice carrying a tremor of anticipation that spoke to months of careful planning. "There's someone here who wants to meet you." "No." The presence of a stranger in their living room registered immediately in Michael's enhanced awareness. Female, elderly, carrying the particular energy signature of someone who possessed deep wisdom and had traveled far to be here. But there was something else, a familiar quality that made Michael's heart skip, an echo of the warmth he remembered from his earliest childhood. "Hello, Michael," the woman said, her voice carrying an accent that sent shivers of recognition through his memory and awakened feelings he thought he'd lost forever. "I am Carmen Rodriguez, Emma's great-aunt and Isabella's sister." Michael rose slowly from his chair, his enhanced senses providing a complete picture of the elegant woman who stood before him. She was shorter than Isabella had been, but carried the same regal bearing and emanated the same warmth that had defined his beloved childhood nanny. Her presence filled the room with an energy that felt like coming home. "You're here because Emma asked you to come," Michael said with certainty, his perception reaching out to encompass the woman's emotional state and the purpose that had brought her across the country. "Sí, mi niño. Emma told me you were ready to learn the full truth about your gift and what it means for your future." Richard stepped forward, still struggling to fully comprehend the extraordinary developments in his son's life. The past 3 months had challenged every assumption he'd held about reality, forcing him to expand his understanding of what was possible. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm still not entirely clear on how your family came to be involved in Michael's development." Carmen smiled gently, her weathered hands folding together as she prepared to share knowledge that had been passed down through generations. "Mr. Harrison, our family has carried this gift for many generations. We see the connections between souls. We perceive the love that flows between people like light, and we know when 2 people are destined to help each other discover their true purpose. And you believe Michael has this gift? I don't believe it, Signor. I know it. Just as I know that his meeting with Emma was not coincidence, but destiny fulfilling itself in its own perfect time. Just as I know that today these children are going to show us something that will change how we understand love itself." Michael felt a familiar presence approaching the penthouse. Emma's distinctive energy signature was unmistakable now, even from 20 floors below. Her approach always announced itself to his consciousness like a bright star moving across his internal sky. "She's coming up," he announced. Moments later, Emma burst through the apartment door with her characteristic directness, followed by Maria, who carried a wrapped package and wore an expression of pleased bewilderment. The events of the past 3 months had transformed Maria's life as dramatically as they had Michael's. The mysterious connection between her daughter and the Harrison family had led to opportunities neither woman could have anticipated. "Michael," Emma announced without preamble, her young face glowing with excitement and purpose. Today is the day we show everyone what we can really do. What do you mean? The Christmas miracle, the one we've been practicing for. Over the past month, Michael and Emma had been working together on what Emma called distant seeing, the ability to perceive and help people who were far beyond their physical location. Their practice sessions had yielded increasingly remarkable results, but Emma had insisted they were preparing for something much more significant. "There's a little girl in the children's hospital," Emma explained to the assembled adults, her voice taking on the serious tone she used when discussing matters of life and death. "She's 8 years old. She's been blind since birth and she's dying of cancer. The doctors say she has maybe 2 weeks to live." Michael felt his enhanced perception reaching toward the hospital Emma described, his consciousness somehow spanning the miles between them and the sick child. The connection formed gradually, like tuning into a distant radio station, until suddenly the child's presence blazed clearly in his awareness. "Sarah," he whispered, the name emerging from his expanding consciousness. "Her name is Sarah, and she's not afraid of dying. She's afraid that no one will remember her after she's gone." "We can help her," Emma said with absolute certainty, her dark eyes bright with determination. "We can show her family that love doesn't end when life ends, and we can help her understand that her blindness has given her the same gift we have, the ability to see what's really important." Richard stared at his son and the extraordinary 7-year-old who had changed their lives so completely. "You're talking about going to the hospital?" "We don't need to go there," Michael replied, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "We can reach her from here. Emma and I together can create a connection that spans any distance." "Michael, that's impossible. Dad, 3 months ago, you would have said everything I can do now was impossible." "But impossible things happen when people love each other enough to believe in them." Carmen stepped forward, her eyes bright with recognition of something she'd been waiting her entire life to witness. "Show them, children. Show them what love can do when it's not limited by what the eyes can see." Michael and Emma joined hands in the center of the living room, their combined abilities creating a field of awareness that the adults could feel even without understanding it. The air around them seemed to shimmer with invisible energy as their consciousness reached across the city toward the children's hospital. "I can see her," Michael whispered, his voice filled with wonder as the connection strengthened and clarified. "She's lying in her bed, and she's not sad. She's just waiting. She knows something beautiful is about to happen." Her family is there," Emma added, her young voice carrying ancient wisdom as she accessed the scene through their shared perception. "Her mother, her father, her little brother. They're all crying because they think they're losing her. But they're not losing her. She's just changing form." As the adults watched in amazement, something extraordinary began to happen. The Christmas tree lights seemed to pulse in rhythm with the children's breathing, and the very air in the room grew warm with an energy that transcended physical explanation. The space around Michael and Emma began to glow with a soft radiance that had no visible source but was unmistakably present. "Tell them, Sarah," Michael said softly, as if speaking to someone only he could perceive. "Tell them what you see now." Across the city, in room 314 of Mount Sinai Children's Hospital, 8-year-old Sarah Martinez suddenly sat up in her bed, her blind eyes wide with wonder. Her family, who had been keeping a heartbroken vigil beside her failing body, watched in shock as their dying daughter's face transformed with joy. "Mama," Sarah whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks, filled with an energy that seemed to come from beyond her physical form. "I can see you, not with my eyes, but with something better. I can see how much you love me, and it's beautiful. It's like golden light all around you. In the Harrison penthouse, Michael and Emma continued to serve as conduits for something that medical science could never quantify, but that love made possible. They were translating the invisible language of the heart, proving that connection transcends physical limitations and that love truly never dies. It only changes form. "She's not going to suffer anymore," Emma announced to the room, tears streaming down her young face as she channeled the profound peace that was settling over the distant child. "She's going to slip away peacefully tonight, but her family will understand now that she's not really leaving. She's just becoming a different kind of light." Richard Harrison, the man who had built an empire but couldn't build his son a future, found himself weeping as he witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about reality. His blind son wasn't disabled. He was gifted beyond measure, and that gift was healing hearts across an entire city. As the day progressed, phone calls began coming in from the hospital. Sarah Martinez had indeed passed peacefully that evening, but her family was calling to thank everyone who had somehow been involved in their daughter's final moments of clarity and peace. The doctors couldn't explain what had happened, but the family knew they had witnessed a miracle. "Michael," Richard said as they prepared for bed that Christmas night, his voice thick with emotion and newfound understanding, "I need to apologize to you." "For what, Dad?" "For spending 3 years trying to fix something that was never broken. For not seeing that you didn't need to be cured, you needed to be celebrated." Michael smiled, his face radiant with the inner light that had grown stronger each day since meeting Emma. "You don't need to apologize. You needed time to learn a new way of seeing, too. What happens now? What do we do with this gift you have?" "We help people," Michael replied simply, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of someone who had found his true purpose. "Emma and I are going to travel and show other families that love transcends every limitation they can imagine. We're going to prove that some people are born to see with their souls instead of their eyes, and that makes the world a more beautiful place." As snow continued to fall outside the penthouse windows, Michael Harrison fell asleep, holding the wooden horse Isabella had carved for him years earlier. In his dreams, he saw her face for the first time, not with his physical eyes, but with the soul sight that had always been his true inheritance. Emma Rodriguez slept peacefully in her small bed across the city, her mother finally understanding that her daughter's autism wasn't a limitation, but a gift that would help heal hearts around the world. And in both their dreams, the children continued their work of showing others that love comes in forms far more beautiful than anything the human eye could ever perceive. The miracle in Central Park had never really been about sight returning to a blind boy. It had been about 2 extraordinary children teaching the world that some things are too beautiful to be seen with anything but the heart, and that love, true love, illuminates everything it touches with a light that never, ever dies. Their story was just beginning. If you want a part 2 of this story, leave it in the comments.